What if everything you knew about dinosaurs was a lie? Welcome to What If Horizons, where we dive into the bizarre, the unexpected, and the downright mind-bending. Today, we're asking a question that could ruffle some feathers, literally. What if dinosaurs had feathers everywhere? Not just on their backs or tails, but everywhere. Imagine a T-Rex with a feathery mustache or a velociraptor rocking a full-body plumage. Sounds ridiculous? Well, buckle up, because we're about to take a deep dive into a world where dinosaurs weren't just scaly monsters but fluffy, feathery fashion icons. Let's start with the basics. We've all seen those Jurassic Park movies, right? Big, scary, scaly creatures stomping around, eating everything in sight. But science has been quietly rewriting that script for years. Paleontologists have discovered that many dinosaurs, especially theropods like the T-Rex, likely had feathers. Not the full body coat we're imagining today, but patches here and there. So, what if evolution went all out? What if feathers weren't just an accessory but the main event? Picture this: a brachiosaurus, towering over the landscape, its long neck covered in a cascade of feathers that shimmer in the sunlight. Instead of a leathery hide, it's got a soft, downy coat that makes it look less like a monster and more like a giant, prehistoric pillow. And don't even get me started on the stegosaurus. Those iconic plates, imagine them covered in feathers, turning this lumbering beast into a walking, breathing feather duster. It's not just a dinosaur, it's a cleaning tool with attitude. Now, let's talk about the implications. If dinosaurs had feathers everywhere, it would change how we think about their behavior. Feathers aren't just for show, they're functional. They provide insulation, help with display, and even play a role in communication. A fully feathered dinosaur might have been more like a bird than a reptile. Imagine a pack of velociraptors, not just hunting together but preening each other's feathers like some kind of prehistoric spa day. It's a far cry from the bloodthirsty killers we're used to seeing on screen. And then there's the question of flight. We know some dinosaurs, like the Microraptor, could glide thanks to their feathers. But what if more dinosaurs had the potential to take to the skies? A fully feathered T-Rex might not have been able to fly, but it could have had some impressive jumping abilities. Imagine a 40-foot-tall dinosaur with the agility of a kangaroo. It's equal parts terrifying and hilarious. Of course, this raises another question. Why didn't all dinosaurs evolve to have feathers everywhere? Was it a matter of climate, predation, or did some dinosaurs just prefer the scaly look? It's a mystery that paleontologists are still trying to unravel. But one thing's for sure. If dinosaurs had feathers everywhere, it would have changed the course of evolution in ways we can only begin to imagine. So, as we explore this feathery alternate reality, keep an open mind. Dinosaurs weren't just the monsters of the past. They were complex, diverse creatures that might have been a lot fluffier than we give them credit for. And who knows, maybe one day, we'll find evidence that proves our feathered dinosaur fantasies weren't so far-fetched after all. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of a journey into a world where dinosaurs weren't just scaly, they were stylish. Let's talk about dating in the age of feathered dinosaurs. Courtship rituals would have been interesting. Imagine a male T-Rex trying to impress his mate not with a mighty roar, but with an elaborate feather display. Those tiny arms suddenly become much more useful when they're covered in vibrant plumage that can be fluffed and preened. Scientists believe some dinosaurs may have used feathers for display purposes, but if they had feathers everywhere, we're talking full-body peacocks of the Mesozoic era. The mating dances alone would put modern birds to shame. Picture a 20-foot-long Carnotaurus doing the equivalent of a TikTok dance routine, shaking its feathered hips while its tiny arms wiggle awkwardly. The fashion implications are equally mind-boggling. Feather patterns could have served as natural camouflage, turning predators into walking works of art. A feathered stegosaurus might have blended into fern forests with intricate leaf-like patterns, while raptors could have sported striped designs perfect for hiding in tall grass. But here's the kicker: what if some species developed seasonal plumage? Winter coats could have been white for snow-covered environments, then molted into earthy tones come spring. Paleontologists would need entirely new methods to reconstruct these ever-changing appearances from fossils. Now consider parenting behaviors. Modern birds use their feathers to brood eggs and protect hatchlings. A fully feathered Mesozoic mother would essentially be a living, breathing incubator, her downy underbelly keeping dozens of eggs warm. The image of a massive feathered dinosaur gently tending to her nest challenges everything we thought we knew about these creatures, nurturing instincts. Even the most fearsome predators might have been doting parents when you add feathers to the equation. The hunting strategies of predators would undergo a complete transformation too. Feathers provide insulation, meaning cold-blooded hunting at night becomes a viable option. A nocturnal, feathered Allosaurus could have been the ultimate stealth hunter, its plumage muffling sound as it stalked prey under moonlight. And those famous velociraptors, their signature killing claws might have been hidden beneath layers of deceptive fluff until the last possible moment, nature's version of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Climate adaptation takes on new dimensions as well. Feathers would have allowed dinosaurs to survive in much colder environments than we previously thought possible. Polar dinosaurs with thick, downy coats could have thrived near the poles, completely rewriting our understanding of prehistoric ecosystems. Maybe the reason we haven't found fossils in certain areas isn't because dinosaurs didn't live there, but because their feathered remains simply didn't preserve well in those conditions. The more you think about it, the clearer it becomes. Feathers change everything. They transform dinosaurs from movie monsters into complex, adaptable creatures that could have survived in nearly any environment on Earth. And that leads us to an even more startling possibility. What if some feathered dinosaurs never actually went extinct? But that's a thought for another segment. For now, let's just appreciate the mental image of a feathered triceratops shaking its magnificent neck frill like a Las Vegas showgirl. Let's examine how this feathery reality would rewrite the history of scientific discovery. When the first dinosaur fossils were uncovered in the 19th century, scientists reconstructed them as giant lizards, but what if those Victorian paleontologists had found perfectly preserved feathered specimens instead? The Crystal Palace dinosaur sculptures might have looked like oversized exotic birds rather than scaly monsters. Charles Darwin might have included feathered dinosaurs in *On the Origin of Species as obvious transitional forms, accelerating acceptance of evolutionary theory by decades. The field of paleontology would have developed completely differently. Instead of chiseling bones from rock, scientists would be painstakingly reconstructing feather patterns from fossilized impressions. Museums would display dinosaurs with vibrant, scientifically accurate plumage rather than dull gray scales. Children might grow up imagining T-Rex as a giant chicken rather than a movie monster. The very word, dinosaur, might carry different connotations. Instead of meaning, terrible lizard, it could have been translated as frightening fowl. Hollywood's portrayal of dinosaurs would never have taken its characteristic dark turn. Jurassic Park's famous raptors might have been depicted with colorful mating displays rather than as killing machines. The iconic T-Rex attack scene could have featured the predator fluffing its feathers in a threat display before striking. Monster movies would have a completely different aesthetic. Imagine Godzilla with elaborate feather crests instead of spiky scales. The entire genre of dinosaur horror might have become dinosaur comedy instead. Our understanding of the dinosaur-bird connection would have been obvious from the start. Instead of the missing link debates that occupied 20th century science, biologists would have clearly seen dinosaurs as birds, direct ancestors. The discovery of Archaeopteryx might not have caused such a sensation, as feathered dinosaurs would have been commonplace in the fossil record. Ornithology and paleontology might have merged into a single field much earlier, with bird researchers routinely studying dinosaur fossils for insights. Even language would be different. Phrases like ruffling feathers might have prehistoric origins rather than avian ones. The term dinosaur might not have become a metaphor for obsolescence. It's hard to call something outdated when it's covered in sophisticated plumage. The insult bird brain might instead be dino brain, implying unexpected intelligence rather than stupidity. The economic implications are equally fascinating. The feather industry might have looked to dinosaur fossils for inspiration in developing new materials. Fashion designers could have drawn from prehistoric feather patterns rather than modern birds. Down jackets might be called Rex coats instead. The entire history of human invention might have taken different turns if we'd always known about feathered dinosaurs. Perhaps early humans would have tried to mimic dinosaur plumage in their first attempts at clothing. Most importantly, this alternate reality forces us to confront how much our perception of prehistory shapes our understanding of life itself. The dinosaurs we imagine say more about our times than theirs. If we'd always known them as feathered creatures, would we have developed different metaphors for power, different symbols of extinction, different ways of thinking about our place in Earth's history? The answer, much like a feathered dinosaur's mating display, is more complex than it first appears. Now let's consider the culinary implications of a fully feathered dinosaur world. Restaurants in the Cretaceous period would have needed entirely different menus. Plucking an entire T-Rex for dinner would make today's turkey preparation look like child's play. Imagine the size of the oven needed to roast a feathered triceratops. The feathers might have actually served as natural insulation, keeping the meat warm for days after cooking. Early human hunters would have faced quite the dilemma. Do you eat the meat and use the feathers for bedding, or turn the whole creature into some kind of prehistoric sleeping bag? The development of cooking techniques would have taken fascinating turns. Maybe our ancestors would have discovered flash frying as the best way to deal with feathered game, instantly crisping the exterior while keeping the meat tender. Barbecue traditions might have begun much earlier as primitive humans learned to slow-cook tough dinosaur meat over open fires. The world's first soups could have been made by boiling feathers for days to extract nutrients, creating a prehistoric version of bone broth. Feathers might have become the original strainers or filters in food preparation. Dining etiquette would have developed differently too. Instead of napkins, fancy restaurants might provide small feathered dinosaurs as living crumb catchers. The concept of finger-licking good would take on new meaning when your appetizer is literally covered in edible plumage. Table manners would include proper feather disposal techniques, and the most sophisticated diners would know how to remove them gracefully without making a mess. The phrase, "as rare as a well-done stegosaurus steak," might have entered common usage, since cooking such thick, insulated meat properly would be incredibly difficult. Modern cuisine would be unrecognizable. KFC's secret recipe might have been developed 65 million years earlier. Thanksgiving could have evolved into a celebration where families gather to eat an entire roasted compsognathus instead of a turkey. The French might have perfected sauces to mask the gamey taste of certain dinosaur meats. Italian pasta could have been served with feathered dinosaur meatballs. Sushi chefs might have developed techniques for serving raw dinosaur flesh with the feathers artistically arranged as garnish. The health food industry would have different priorities. Dinosaur feather tea might be marketed as the ultimate superfood, packed with prehistoric proteins. Gym bros would swear by velociraptor egg omelets for muscle growth. Organic food movements might advocate for free-range dinosaur meat rather than factory-farmed options. The debate between white meat, young dinosaurs, versus dark meat, older specimens, would be far more complex when considering feather density and distribution. Even our basic tableware would be different. The first spoons might have been modeled after hollow dinosaur feathers rather than seashells. Plates could have been made from hardened dinosaur skin with feather trimmings. Drinking vessels might have utilized naturally waterproof feathers as liners. The entire history of human tool use might have taken a softer, more feather-centric approach if our ancestors had constant access to dinosaur plumage. This culinary thought experiment reveals how deeply our food culture is tied to our environment. If our prehistoric pantry had included feathered giants, every aspect of how we prepare, serve and think about food would be fundamentally different. Maybe the real question isn't whether dinosaurs had feathers everywhere, but whether we're ready to admit how much tastier that might have made history. Let's explore how fully feathered dinosaurs would have transformed the fashion industry throughout history. Early humans might have skipped the whole invent clothing step entirely. Why bother sewing hides when you could just drape yourself in giant dinosaur feathers? Cave paintings would show our ancestors strutting around in full feathered capes, making today's haute couture look downright primitive. The first fashion trends might have been seasonal migrations to collect freshly molted feathers from nesting grounds. The textile revolution would have taken a completely different path. Instead of weaving wool or cotton, ancient civilizations might have perfected feather bonding techniques. Egyptian pharaohs could have worn ceremonial robes made from iridescent raptor feathers rather than linen. Roman senators might have preferred togas lined with downy dinosaur undercoating for those chilly Senate meetings. The Silk Road might have been called the Feather Trail, trading exotic plumage from distant lands rather than fabric. Medieval armor design would have needed serious rethinking. Knights clanking around in metal suits would have been outmatched by warriors wearing layered feather armor, just as protective but far more mobile. Arrows might have gotten stuck in the dense plumage before reaching the skin underneath. The concept of heraldry would have been much more colorful, with knights displaying actual dinosaur feather patterns on their shields. Jousting tournaments would have been spectacular displays of fluttering crests and plumed helmets. The Industrial Revolution's textile mills might have specialized in feather processing rather than cotton spinning. Victorian ladies' enormous dresses could have been supported by dinosaur feather frameworks instead of whalebone corsets. The whole concept of millinery would have referred to hats made from actual dinosaur crests rather than decorated with bird feathers. Imagine walking down a 19th century street where every gentleman's top hat was made from a single T-Rex feather. Modern fashion would be unrecognizable. Down jackets, more like full-body stegosaurus coats. The little black dress might have been replaced by the iridescent raptor sheath. Fashion Week runways would feature models wearing dramatic feathered headdresses reconstructed from fossil evidence. Sustainable fashion movements might advocate for using only naturally molted dinosaur feathers rather than farmed materials. The controversy over wearing fur would pale in comparison to debates about wearing dinosaur plumage. Even the military would have had to adapt. Camouflage patterns would be based on actual dinosaur feather coloration rather than abstract designs. Special forces might have studied how predators used their feathers for stealth. Air Force pilots could have worn flight suits lined with Microraptor-inspired feathers for better aerodynamics. The space program might have researched dinosaur feather insulation for astronaut suits. This sartorial thought experiment makes one thing clear: our relationship with clothing is deeply tied to available materials. If Earth's history had left us with abundant dinosaur feathers rather than sheep's wool or cotton plants, every stitch of clothing ever made would tell a different story. Perhaps the most shocking realization: in this alternate reality, skinny jeans might never have been invented. You can't squeeze dinosaur feathers into tight denim. And really, wouldn't that alone make it a better timeline? Let's examine how fully feathered dinosaurs would reshape our modern sports and entertainment. The Olympics would feature entirely different events. Imagine featherweight boxing with actual feathered dinosaurs. Basketball players might have evolved to mimic raptor leaps, using their plumage for dramatic hang time. The NBA draft would include wingspan measurements that actually refer to wings. Baseball outfielders could glide on feathered limbs to make impossible catches, turning every game into a highlight reel. Extreme sports would reach new heights, literally. Base jumpers might wear suits modeled after Microraptor feathers, attempting dangerous glides between skyscrapers. Rock climbers could develop dinosaur-inspired grippy feathers for scaling cliffs without equipment. The X Games would feature events where athletes try to recreate suspected dinosaur mating displays, with judges scoring on both technical difficulty and plumage presentation. The entertainment industry would undergo a complete transformation. Cirque du Soleil performers would incorporate feathered dinosaur movements into their acts, creating breathtaking aerial displays. Magicians might perfect the art of making entire dinosaurs disappear in a puff of feathers. Broadway musicals would feature chorus lines of dancers in elaborate feathered costumes, moving like a synchronized raptor pack. Theme parks would offer revolutionary attractions. Roller coasters could feature cars with movable feather attachments that adjust during the ride to simulate flight. Haunted houses might replace rubber monsters with animatronic feathered dinosaurs that brush against visitors in the dark. Water parks could have slides ending in pools filled with harmless floating feathers instead of water. Even traditional sports would change. Soccer goalies might wear outfits that expand like feathered displays to block more of the net. Hockey players could develop new checking techniques using feather-padded uniforms. Tennis players might argue whether a feather touching the ball constitutes a legal hit. Golf courses would need special rules for nests built by descendants of feathered dinosaurs. The fitness industry would take inspiration from dinosaur physiology. Gyms might offer raptor conditioning classes focusing on explosive leg power. Yoga instructors would teach poses based on fossil evidence of dinosaur resting positions. Personal trainers could analyze clients' movements using knowledge of dinosaur biomechanics. Even basic equipment like treadmills might be designed to accommodate both walking and short bursts of feather-assisted leaps. Esports would develop dinosaur-themed battle royales where players control fully feathered avatars with special abilities. Virtual reality systems could simulate what it's like to hunt or flee as various feathered dinosaur species. Augmented reality games might have players collect different feather types instead of Pokémons. This athletic perspective reveals how deeply movement and competition are tied to our biological heritage. If we'd grown up watching feathered dinosaurs instead of mammals as the dominant creatures, our entire concept of physical achievement might be measured by different standards. The world record for long jump might be measured in hundreds of feet rather than meters. And perhaps most importantly, the dunk contest would finally live up to its full potential. Let's consider how fully feathered dinosaurs would revolutionize transportation and urban design. Cities might have developed completely differently if our ancestors had domesticated feathered dinosaurs instead of horses. Imagine rush hour traffic consisting of commuters riding atop giant, flightless feathered creatures. The original carpool lane would have been a dino lane. Public transportation could have been massive, feather-insulated carriages pulled by teams of hadrosaurs, with built-in temperature regulation thanks to their plumage. The invention of the wheel might have been delayed by centuries when you can just hitch a ride on a feathered raptor. Ancient trade routes would have followed dinosaur migration paths rather than river valleys. The Pony Express, more like the pterodactyl postal service, with messages carried by feathered couriers capable of gliding over obstacles. The Silk Road might have been unnecessary when traders could ride feathered dinosaurs directly over mountain ranges. Modern infrastructure would face unique challenges. Highway overpasses would need to accommodate the height of fully feathered brachiosaurs. Parking garages would require special feather grooming stations. Traffic lights might include signals for dinosaur riders, and rush hour would involve navigating through flocks of molting commuter dinosaurs shedding feathers everywhere. The concept of road rage would take on new meaning when your vehicle can literally peck at other commuters. Urban planning would prioritize different amenities. Instead of gas stations, cities would need widespread feeding troughs. Skyscrapers might feature special landing platforms for flying dinosaur species. Subway systems could have been replaced by underground dino tunnels with extra high ceilings. Parks would be designed around dinosaur nesting areas rather than dog runs. The morning commute soundtrack wouldn't be car horns, but the melodic calls of hundreds of feathered dinosaurs. The automotive industry would never have developed as we know it. The first cars might have been enclosed cabins strapped to dinosaur backs, with reins instead of steering wheels. The transition to mechanical vehicles would have been slower when your transportation could reproduce itself and didn't require fossil fuels. Traffic accidents would involve feathery fender benders rather than metal crumple zones. The term horsepower would be Rex power instead. Air travel would have taken a different evolutionary route. Early attempts at flight might have focused on training flying dinosaurs rather than building machines. The Wright brothers could have been dinosaur trainers instead of engineers. Modern airports might feature roosts instead of hangars, with trained pterosaurs undergoing pre-flight feather checks. The in-flight meal would literally be you feeding your mount mid-journey. Turbulence would be far more interesting when your aircraft can get spooked by storms. This transportation thought experiment reveals how our movement shapes civilization. If we'd relied on feathered dinosaurs instead of machines, our cities, economies, and daily lives would be structured around entirely different rhythms. The morning commute might have been more scenic, but you'd definitely need to budget extra time for your ride stopping to preen its feathers. And let's be honest, dinosaur-based public transportation would make for much better stories than "my train was delayed." At least you could blame tardiness on your mount spotting an attractive potential mate. Let's explore how fully feathered dinosaurs would transform warfare and military strategy throughout history. Ancient battles would have looked completely different with feathered cavalry charges. Imagine Roman legions facing off against hordes of feather-armored raptor riders. The concept of shock and awe would take on new meaning when your enemy arrives on the backs of 20-foot-tall, brightly plumed predators. Medieval castles might have developed specialized defenses against flying dinosaur attacks, with towers designed to knock feathered assailants out of the air. The invention of gunpowder would have faced new challenges when your targets are covered in natural flame-retardant plumage. Muskets might have been less effective against feathered armor that could absorb or deflect bullets. Military uniforms could have evolved to mimic dinosaur feather patterns for camouflage, with elite units wearing actual preserved dinosaur plumage as status symbols. The famous red coat of British soldiers might have been a Rex coat, instead, made from T-Rex feathers. Naval warfare would have undergone radical changes. Ships might have been designed with special compartments for aquatic feathered dinosaurs used in boarding actions. The age of sail could have seen vessels accompanied by flocks of flying dinosaurs for reconnaissance. Submarine warfare would be complicated by feathered marine reptiles that could spot underwater vessels from the air. The phrase, "loose lips sink ships," might have been, "loose feathers reveal ships," instead. World War I trench warfare would have played out differently with feathered dinosaurs able to traverse no man's land more easily. The development of tanks might have been delayed when you have armored dinosaurs that can regenerate their own armor. Air combat could have begun earlier with pilots riding trained pterosaurs instead of flying fragile biplanes. The concept of dogfights would literally involve dinosaurs fighting mid-air. Modern military technology would face unique adaptations. Stealth bombers might incorporate dinosaur feather technology to reduce radar signatures. Special forces could use feather-based camouflage that changes color like some prehistoric species might have. Drones might be replaced by trained miniature dinosaurs for surveillance missions. Nuclear deterrence could involve threats of releasing genetically engineered feathered dinosaurs rather than missiles. The arms race would have taken bizarre turns. Instead of developing atomic weapons, nations might have competed to breed the most fearsome battle dinosaurs. Biological weapons program could have focused on engineering dinosaur diseases rather than human-targeted pathogens. The space race might have included attempts to launch feathered dinosaurs into orbit to test their adaptation to zero gravity. This military perspective reveals how conflict shapes technological progress. If our wars had been fought with and against feathered dinosaurs, every aspect of defense and weaponry would be fundamentally different. The Geneva Conventions might include provisions about humane treatment of war dinosaurs. Veterans organizations would care for retired battle dinosaurs alongside human soldiers. And perhaps most importantly, the concept of military intelligence would have to account for the unpredictable nature of feathered warriors. The psychological impact of feathered dinosaur warfare would be overstated. Imagine the terror of seeing an entire hillside suddenly erupt in colorful feathers as hidden raptor cavalry prepares to charge. Post-traumatic stress might involve nightmares about being chased by giant chickens rather than battlefield explosions. On the bright side, at least peacekeeping missions would be more interesting when your show of force involves parading magnificent feathered dinosaurs through the streets. Let's dive into how fully feathered dinosaurs would reshape art, literature, and culture. The earliest cave paintings might have depicted intricate feather patterns rather than simple animal outlines. Ancient myths and legends would feature feathered gods and monsters instead of scaly ones. The concept of dragons might never have developed when real-life feathered dinosaurs could inspire far more dramatic tales. Imagine Greek mythology with feathered centaurs or Norse legends with plumed serpents instead of wingless ones. Literature would be filled with different metaphors and imagery. Shakespeare's works might have compared lovers to the iridescent plumage of a velociraptor rather than a summer's day. Gothic novels would feature eerie feathered creatures lurking in the shadows instead of dark, scaly beasts. Children's books would teach about the beauty of feathered dinosaurs rather than the ferocity of their scaly counterparts. The phrase, "a feather in your cap," might have originated from ancient hunters wearing actual dinosaur feathers as trophies. Art movements would have taken entirely different directions. Renaissance painters might have studied dinosaur feather anatomy with the same intensity as human musculature. Impressionists could have focused on capturing the shimmering iridescence of feathered dinosaurs in different lights. Modern art might have abstracted feather patterns rather than geometric shapes. Sculptors would have faced the challenge of recreating the softness of feathers in stone or metal, leading to entirely new techniques. Music and dance would be deeply influenced by feathered dinosaurs. Traditional instruments might have used dinosaur feathers as components, creating unique sounds. Ballet could have evolved to mimic the graceful movements of feathered creatures rather than human forms. Rock bands might have incorporated feathered costumes into their performances, turning concerts into prehistoric spectacles. Even classical compositions could have been inspired by the calls and movements of feathered dinosaurs. Fashion photography would have a different aesthetic, with models posing alongside feathered dinosaur replicas. Film and television would feature feathered creatures as central characters rather than scaly monsters. The horror genre would focus on the eerie rustling of feathers in the dark rather than the slithering of scales. Science fiction might explore alternate timelines where feathered dinosaurs never went extinct, imagining a world where humans coexist with these magnificent creatures. Cultural festivals would celebrate feathered dinosaurs in unique ways. Parades might feature giant feathered dinosaur floats, and traditional dances could mimic their movements. National symbols and mascots would likely be feathered dinosaurs rather than birds or mammals. Even language would be peppered with dinosaur-related idioms and expressions, replacing common animal metaphors with feathered dinosaur ones. This cultural perspective reveals how deeply our art and stories are tied to the natural world around us. If feathered dinosaurs had been the dominant creatures throughout history, our creative expressions would reflect their beauty, complexity, and majesty. Every brushstroke, every word, every note would carry the imprint of a world where feathers ruled the earth. And honestly, who wouldn't want to live in a world where poetry is inspired by the graceful flight of a feathered pteranodon? Finally, let's consider how fully feathered dinosaurs would impact our modern understanding of biology and evolution. The field of genetics would have taken a different path if scientists had been studying dinosaur feathers instead of pea plants. Darwin's finches might have been overshadowed by Darwin's dinosaurs, with their diverse feather patterns providing clear evidence of natural selection. The discovery of DNA could have come earlier if researchers were trying to understand how feathers could produce such a wide array of colors and patterns. Modern biotechnology might focus on recreating dinosaur feathers rather than cloning mammals. Genetic engineering could aim to develop new materials inspired by feather structures, leading to breakthroughs in insulation, waterproofing, and even flight technology. Medical research might study how dinosaur feathers regulated body temperature, potentially leading to new treatments for human fevers or hypothermia. The field of paleontology would be completely transformed. Instead of reconstructing skeletons, scientists would be reconstructing entire feather coats. Museums would display dinosaurs in full, vibrant plumage, changing how the public perceives these ancient creatures. The debate over whether dinosaurs were warm-blooded or cold-blooded might have been settled much earlier if their feathers provided clear evidence of temperature regulation. Conservation efforts would take on new dimensions. If some feathered dinosaurs had survived to the present day, protecting their habitats would be a major priority. Ecologists would study how these creatures interact with modern ecosystems, potentially leading to new strategies for preserving biodiversity. The concept of rewilding might involve reintroducing feathered dinosaurs to areas where they once thrived. Education would be fundamentally different. Biology classes would focus on feather anatomy alongside human anatomy. Evolution lessons would use feathered dinosaurs as primary examples of adaptation and speciation. Children's science fairs might feature projects on dinosaur feather colors rather than volcano models. Even medical schools might include courses on dinosaur physiology to better understand the evolutionary origins of certain traits. This scientific perspective reveals how our understanding of life is shaped by the creatures we study. If feathered dinosaurs had been at the forefront of biological research, our knowledge of genetics, evolution, and ecology would be far more advanced in some areas. The boundaries between birds and dinosaurs would be blurred from the start, leading to a more integrated understanding of life's history. So, what do you think about this feathered dinosaur world? Could you imagine a T-Rex strutting around like a giant peacock? How would our history, culture, and science be different if feathers had been everywhere? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this episode if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to What If Horizons for more mind-bending explorations of alternate realities. Until next time, keep imagining the impossible.